Hello, my name is Erica Jong. All of you, I'm sure, like my novel Fear of Flying, because in it you met real people. People who loved and suffered and lived. My novel contained real people. That's why you liked it. My new novel, How to Die Successfully, contains those same characters, and it contains two new characters, you and me. All of us are real. Goodbye.
Erica Jong, alias Kathy Acker, your writing marks a clear departure from the kind of fiction we have associated here and in Europe with the more recent wave of women's writing. Indeed, it seems in many ways to invert quite consciously many of the landmarks and signposts which figure in the terrain of both femininity and feminism in literature. For example, it seems avowedly anti-romantic, while its subject is often sexual desire. It seems to shake off, in a sense, all the trimmings, all the things that we usually expect with when we talk about sex or when we write about women's sexuality, the kind of soft-focused rain, even the kind of gentle polymorphous perversity we see in a film like 9.5 Weeks. Many of your characters set out, or they seem to set out, on a course of debasement and even degradation. There nonetheless always seems to be some kind of control that surfaces. There's a tension between being in control and then letting go, and I hope that you'll perhaps talk about that in a little bit more detail later. Sex, it seems, isn't so much associated with pleasure as with experimentation, with a kind of metaphoric relief. Perhaps this brings you closer to the landscape of male sexuality and pornography, and again, that's something that I would like you very much to talk about. Your writing represents, I think, a threatening or a menacing subtext to that tradition very popular in women's writing today, which is explicitly autobiographical. When you seem to speak out in the first person, you do from the standpoint of incest or of perversity within the family. There is absolutely no notion of harmony or of disruption within a unified family setup. Your starting point, if you like, is one of complete perversion. In Blood and Guts in high school, there is a strong degree of brutal, alienated sexuality, and this seems to take precedence over almost everything else. The writing is overwhelmingly concerned with fragmentation, with bits of the body, with fingers and genitals and skin and manipulated and in many ways mutilated body imagery. And this, I think, of course, does lead fairly fluidly to your preference in writing style for a jagged, cut-up, perforated method, a writing which is cracked and fissured, which is in many ways following from that technique developed by Burroughs, which I think has been labelled cut up. It's a technique of interrupting the flow of a narrative by introducing a completely different and very diverse and apparently very contradictory sort of strand. And also the thing which I find most refreshing, in fact, in your writing, which I like very much, which is the element of the spoken voice. Which reminds me of the best American writing. I'm thinking about William, As I Lay Dying, William Faulkner, which really seems to me something which critics haven't very much dealt with when they've spoken to you before. Now, I don't know whether all of this, in fact, puts you in the camp of the postmodern. It certainly implies that you're a post-structuralist in that you're borrowing of chunks of other people's writing, and your irreverent attitude to the artist as a genius indicates, I think, a sense of healthy disrespect for the literary canon. And I'm sure that's also disturbing to mainstream readers and also to many critics. You're quoting and you're borrowing from people as diverse as Charles Dickens and Baudelaire. My feeling, whether or not you're a post-structuralist or postmodernist, my feeling is that I find what's most interesting about your writing is that it comes within something that we might see as being punk. your interest in the body, and in the body as a weapon, an instrument, a resource, a site of pleasure, a site of despair, and so on and so forth. I would put it very much within the James White and the Contortions, Distort Yourself framework.
Yeah.
Bob Longo's paintings, again, seems to me to have occupy a similar terrain as your writing, which again I like very much. And I think I would start off by perhaps backtracking a bit and asking you where you come from, how your writing started, and how perhaps you feel yourself no longer within this New York framework, or whether you feel that you still do have some kind of location within those concerns, which very much emerged from the early 70s New York avant-garde, also Patti Smith as well, I would say. Okay.
Okay, you touched on so much. I'll try to be as brief as possible because it's a bit of a long history. I came out of a poetry scene. I was born in New York and came out of a poetry scene when I was in my teens. I dated a man when I was 14, we're talking about, who ran something called the Film Co-op, which was all the avant-garde filmmakers of that time. It was pre-Warhol, so it was Markopoulos and Stan Brakhage and that kind of people, which is a great deal of montage. At the same time, I'm talking about my teens, I met the Black Mountain School of Poets. I was closest to Robert Kelly. I met Creeley, I met those, and those Olson, I would say, was probably my earliest influence. I mean, this is a poetry scene that's not terribly well known in England.
Yeah, that's right.
But I was very much a child of that poetry scene. When I went to college, I went first to Brandeis, but then I transferred, because of someone named Herbert Marcuse, to UCSD. And I'm really speaking fast now because I'm worried about time. And there I became very close to a poet and an art critic named David Antin. He was probably my main teacher, and his closest friend was Jerome Rothenberg. And I've said this many times, I don't know what they think of it, is that they're almost my fathers, who I've definitely revolted against. But David was very much a conceptualist in terms of writing. And because he knew the art scene very well, so many of the ways he'd approach writing, which was very unusual for writers at that time, was through a conceptual framework. And I think that from there, and also because I was trained in classics rather than in literature, and I was trained by one of the main students of Jakobson. So structuralism really was very deeply my background. And to tell you the truth, I didn't come out of feminism that way. I came out of structuralism very deeply. And I've never, until recently, really thought about the content of what I write.
Yeah.
Let's see, that's a very early history. Okay, very quickly. My writing was not accepted because at the same time, the other big influence on me was, though I came from a wealthy family, I was disowned, and et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, wanted to leave university because David said, if you're a writer, you have nothing to do with the academia. So I came back to New York under David Antin, under David Antin's advice, and never really thought about money. I was living on scholarships and things, and found myself very sick and needing a job with no credentials to get a job. I mean, a university education doesn't do you anything. And blah-blah-blah, ended up working in a sex show. Now, what this did to me is it very quickly politicized me and probably threw content into my work without my thinking about it, because I kept writing to keep my mind together while I was doing basically dirty movies in the sex show. So that was the other side of me, was the streets. And the two things, in a way, I guess, were schizophrenia, but a schizophrenia that never tore me apart, though almost at times did. I think that accounts a little why I got into punk. I mean, in a way, I was always very alienated from what was going on in New York, the Warhol scene and the art scene around people like Vito Acconci and Laurie Anderson, because of the ivory tower business. I hope I'm not speaking too faster. And when punk came along, which was not the punk of England, in New York it was very much an amalgamation between my generation of artists, musicians. It was mainly middle-class white kids who were really alienated and found themselves without money and found themselves no way to speak about poverty, no way to speak about our own lives. And suddenly, I don't know what happened, but suddenly one year everyone began to work together and to speak together. And that's when Silver, L'Étranger, came on the scene. And he sort of brought Foucault and, more important, Anti-Oedipus. And so there was some theory for the first, and politically the autonomia, because some of the people from the autonomia were coming over to New York, mainly BIFO, people like that. So there was this whole amalgamation politically in art, in writing, and it was the first time I could speak. Anyway, so that's the background of what that whole process. Then I left New York officially 2 years ago, though, from about 6 years to 2 years ago, and being in England that's been another thing and has changed me. So not so much in Don Quixote, but in the novel I'm writing now is very, very different. I think I began to question the avant-garde, and I've pretty much, though the old moves are there, pretty much gone against it in the new book.
Could you talk just a little bit about the William Burroughs connection? I mention that because I think in my experience I've only ever met 2 or 3 women who were diehard fans of William Burroughs. And I've always personally had some fascination for him, although again, he's a sort of writer I think that women are often encouraged to read by their male lovers and kind of, sweat a bit, get through it, and then feel not quite certain about what they think by the time they come to the end. It surprises me somewhat to find you so interested in Burroughs and so very much influenced by his method. Perhaps you might like to say a few words about the persona, the mysterious persona of William Burroughs.
Oh, I love Burroughs. All right, that's a very simple thing. Though I was brought up by poets, I wanted to write prose. And when I was 21, I was looking for models of how to write prose. And because I came out of the poetry scene, which is you learn how to write very differently than when you're writing prose. Burroughs and Kerouac were really my only models at that time. A bit of Creeley's prose, but he was still a poet writing prose, whereas Burroughs was a real prose writer. And I think in The Third Mind, just conceptually, Burroughs was, at that time, the only American writer who was to such a large extent considering how did language work politically, what is image, what is journalese, what is image in newspaper. And it was that heavy conceptualism that I really loved. And that I modeled my writing on it when I was 21. I mean, I learned how to write by doing what Burroughs said to do. But that's when I was 21. I am 39 now, so, I read Burroughs now and then now. I think he's very funny. I like him, but to me it's very old hat. But, I mean, he is marvelously sexist, but...
Oh, sure, yeah, but I've seen, for example, a number of a shared set of themes and areas of overlap in interest. For example, terrorism, and control, surveillance, sexual extremities, experimentation, the body as a focus for endless kind of anxiety, and particularly terrorism. I mean, that seems to surface every so often in your writing.
Well, there are reasons for it, but I don't think it has much to do with Burroughs. I mean, it just sort of makes sense in the world today.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very much a world controlled by, political powers whose power is such that right-wing, left-wing agitation almost doesn't make sense anymore, if you know what I mean.
Yes, I agree. What about the connection that you might or might not see between yourself writing as a woman and the existence of this vastly expanding women's writing network?
Well, I think that's only a recent consideration because I didn't come out of the women's movement and I didn't... It took me a long time to, I don't know what. I mean, feminism to me at first, there was an early feminist, not movement, group in New York, the International, what were they called? International something. And I'd sent them a piece. They were doing a magazine. They wrote back saying, no, we don't want this kind of writing. You're trying to write like Malcolm Lowry and you're not as good as Malcolm Lowry. I mean, it was terribly standardized, the kind of styles that you had to write in. And I don't think I had a clear idea if I was a woman or not. I mean, I'd gone to an all-girls school, and I hadn't even known a boy till I was 15. And it was only in college that, sort of a lot of the sexism really hit me. And I think I just didn't want to be told anything. I didn't want to be pinned down. Now, of course, now I very much consider myself a feminist, but it took a lot of living in the adult world to change my mind. So now it's a consideration, but it wouldn't have been for many years.
In some ways that might free you from the constraints of feeling that you have to write within one or other particular kind of feminist style.
Well, I've always been terribly influenced by French literature, and the French feminists influenced me greatly. When you mentioned before about objection, I mean, Kristeva's book, The Powers of Horror, is a major work for me.
Yes.
Some of I'm not going to say her name incorrectly, Irigarei's work is very important for me, mainly stylistically, believe it or not.
But also their interest in the body.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Where I can't say that the English feminists have been terribly important for me.
Yes. Can I ask you some questions about the world of publishing, whether or not you see yourself still within an underground or the underground, what the costs perhaps are of moving into the mainstream, and what feelings you might have about the literary establishment in this country? Do they also see you as an enfant terrible?
Well, I obviously I'm not part of the underground anymore. I mean, I am published by mainstream publishers, though I think I'm probably a bit of a token maverick in that group. How I see myself, I mean, it's very hard to exist as a writer. I don't really like the separation underground, overground, except when you're talking about specific issues. I think you get published how you get published, and you know what your world is and who reads you. And publishing, I mean, I can't see anyone saying no to a commercial publisher if they had the chance, for economic reasons, if nothing else, and because of the distribution. You can't get distribution. I mean, there is no underground publishing really in England, first of all. You know, all the companies are overground.
Have suddenly.
Yeah, so it's not even worth talking about. But I think the English literary establishment, which I'm not terribly sure is, it'd be an interesting discussion, actually, how it differs from the American literary establishment. That would be interesting. Anyway, the English literary, the sort of Uxbridge business, is predicated, among other things, upon class. What do I think of class? I mean, bring back nuclear weapons and nuke the public schools is what I think of the English literary establishment. There are a lot of good young writers in this country, and they can't get published. It's very, very difficult for them if they don't have the right class background. And there are no venues, there are no ways for them to come up in the world. I think it's changing slowly in this country, but I think it's very difficult for young writers.
Do you see yourself as writing or having written pornography?
Pornography. Depends what we mean by pornography. Obviously, I use sexual material in my books. I make use of genres, that I copy either other texts or I copy genres. I have copied both books that are considered pornography. Not all that much. Mainly, I've copied what's considered erotica, if we want to make the distinction. And I've, in the early work, used pornography as a genre to explore it, but I haven't lately. I haven't, let me see, I don't even think I did in Blood and Guts. I think I was using erotica. I'm making a very, crude distinction now, but, I take something like Gamiana by Alfred de Musset or,
Yes.
Trocchi's work to be erotica, not pornography.
Yes.
I take pornography to be 42nd Street schlock.
So who do you think people are turned on by it, aroused by it?
If people are turned on by my work, I'm amazed. Because I'm always deconstructing, oh, that was an awful word, but I'm always using it to consider how does it work, to change context, to, I'm always like destroying, the hell with the word deconstructing, I'm always destroying, rigidities, habitual meanings, habitual contexts. So if someone is actually turned, in something like Kathy Goes to Haiti, see, the problem is most of my work isn't even known in this country, but something like Kathy Goes to Haiti, I did to some extent write as a porn book. I just wanted to see if I could write a porn book. That's the only time I did that. And even then I was cutting away. I was trying to write a Nancy Drew porn book, just to take the piss out of it. Could someone get off on it? Oh, I don't know. People get off on all sorts of things, really. I don't know,
Have you been criticized for the kind of sexual writing, then, the kind of erotica that you've developed?
Oh, God, I get obscene phone calls sometimes. Oh, yes, of course. It's not, but I rarely am directly criticized. Usually someone is just, for instance, someone will interview me and then really slag me off. But they'll never say it to my face. And
when you've been involved in panel discussions about question of pornography,
Right.
again, once again, within the context of feminist critiques. What line have you pursued, if any? Have you?
Well, I was involved in a panel this fall that Andrea Dworkin did a talk, and then I think I was sort of the token non-Dworkin person on the panel. And the line I pursued, which is very much, I mean, theoretically, in the Anglo-Saxon world, probably the lesbian S&M groups would be the closest. If I do have to take a line, I mean, I'm a writer, I'm not a politician in that way, but or a theorist. Would be the closest. That is, you know, we have to be allowed to talk about things. We have to talk about things as they are, not as they fit into frameworks that are mainly helping us get our strength to battle against sexism. I mean, you know, it's always contextual battles. You know, some things are right at some times, some things are right at other times. Exactly. You know, me, I'm a writer who's trying to see how things are. I'm not so much trying to develop the strength of a woman to get away from her if unpleasant husband, say, or something like that. And also, you know, it very much on the panel and always comes to the problem of power, of what we think of power, of what we think the nexus are between political power, personal power, and sex. And do we want to even talk about this question? You know, and the whole, you know, of course, the minute this comes up, the whole thing breaks open. And of course, you know, that's what so much of my books are about.
But is there not nonetheless a contradiction between you suggesting that when you are writing erotica, you're deconstructing and you're actually playing around with genres and you're mixing and you know, cutting up, and at the same time the fact that you're moving towards, if you like, a de-romanticized, realistic portrayal of sexuality, if you like, a raw or a brutal or a completely alienated and no soft focused sex.
Well, I'm not sure I said that. I mean, for instance, if you take a certain scene, like once I remember in a very early work, I read a true romance, one of those true romance magazines, and I found this wonderful story. By wonderful, I mean I was fascinated by it. Story about a Vietnam soldier who came home to his, maybe it was Kansas family, and you know, hi mom, hi dad, hi sis, and he was very flipped out, you know, having had hard times in Vietnam, and ended up thinking his sister was a young Chinese girl and raping her. Now there this, you know, story was sitting right in, you know, a schlocko magazine that any 14-year-old would buy, this is true American true romance. And I thought, that's it, that's perfect. And I just told the story again, you know, somewhat cleaning it up, meaning showing how brutal it really was. You know, and I thought, somehow people don't see what they read. They don't read what they read. And you have to do very little to say, look at what you're reading. You know, look at what you're seeing. Some of Sidney Sheldon's novels are incredibly, I don't know, brutal. I mean, he has one novel, Bloodline, that's based around 3 times reenacts the snuff scene. Now, this is a best-selling novel. No one calls this pornography. You know, no one talks about the kind of society in which a book that was on the bestseller list #1 for years was based on a snuff scene, and it was technically, because I know enough about how a novel works, of course, technically the novel was based on, you know, that the reader, as the reader read the book, would have to get off on the sex scene. I mean, the whole action of the novel would slow up to almost nothing when it came to the orgasm and the death of the main actress who was being killed. I thought, you know, don't people see? You know, it's always that question.
So what you're also saying is that when you borrow, or when you rewrite stories, or when you lift bits and pieces from, say, popular culture, you're also, in a sense, attempting to draw attention to its power and its potency. And
well, I'm trying to do a lot of things. I'm trying to see sometimes. Sometimes
in a new context.
Often I use material I don't understand, that I read something and I say, I don't believe that. What's going on? And so I copy it to try to find out what's going on, but I take it out of context. So I don't say, oh, this is a bestseller, this is just, let's look at this story. Let's take it right, let's see what a James Bond plot looks like. If we forget it's James Bond, we're not seeing it on TV. And it turns out to be terribly racist. But, you know, with the whole James Bond machines and everything else, you don't realize how terribly racist it is.
That's right. What about, do you look to popular culture then as a continual source of interest and fascination?
I look to everything. It's all, culture is all a garbage bag now. We don't live in a world where, we're taught, this is the Bible and we're all following the Bible. We don't have set rules anymore in any area, including culture. And it's just, David Anton said that. It's one of the best things he said. He said, it's a comic book world. It all comes in and it all goes out and goes every which way.
Do you have, however, the sort of fascination that many women have expressed, even though for example, girls' comics, Jackie Magazine, Just 17 or whatever, despite the fact that you know how it's manipulating, you know what it's saying? Right. Do you share that kind of fascination?
To tell you the truth, I do read, I can tell you what I read of popular culture, what I read. I've never in my life read true romances, except for these kind of detective soldier things. But, girls' true romance, no, I don't. It doesn't interest me at all, never has.
So who do you read or what?
Well, you mean of popular culture? I read muscle magazines, weightlifting magazines, motorcycle magazines, sometimes science magazines. That's what I read. Pornography. I read a lot of pornography. And pretty much anything I can get my hands on. Of novels, I always read detective science fiction. I read a lot, but I just don't read romance.
And what about literature?
Oh, I read pretty much everything. Except I don't read a certain kind of, the sort of semi-intellectuals that came along. Really sort of famous English novelists I don't read. I tend to read either, Monique Wittig or Claude Simon or, really good literature. Or I read detective stories and science fiction. And, well, that's really good too. But I don't read the sort of middle range. I don't read, I've read Saul Bellow, but I don't read Philip Roth, or I don't read Bernard Malamud, or I don't really enjoy that. I think it's taboo that fascinates me, and not sexuality per se. Not the fact of two people getting it off with each other, or more than two. But, the areas of taboo. Certainly does in the new book. I don't think I write about myself. I know it ends up coming in there, but I don't think about it. But I do write about the body, because the body fascinates. Anything that is fascinates me, because it's apart from all the received opinions that we have. There's something about sexuality that I know sexuality partly operates on training and education and whatever, how you've been pushed as a child and traumas and all that. But there's something very ground there. And it's the physical part that fascinates me. And the other thing that always, finally you just deal with your fascinations, and it's hard to talk about fascination because you don't have a wonderful theory about it. The other thing that fascinates me is the ability to make, to take your own body and make it something else. To take, just the simple process of doing things, very simple doing, like laying bricks, like watching a muscle move. I find that incredibly beautiful. I can't say.
And that's manifested also in bodybuilding.
Oh, I find bodybuilding
style
absolutely
and fashion
beautiful. Yeah.
Also.
Yeah. It's simple. It doesn't mess up your mind. I guess it's partly I like people like that too, who just do what they do and are terribly simple. And I like bodybuilders a lot. I think bodybuilding probably lobotomizes you a little bit. You get very simple.
Are these themes also pursued in Don Quixote and in the work that you're engaged on right now?
Well, Don Quixote, I think Don Quixote was an end for me. I wanted to wrap up the New York art world. And to my mind, I wanted to do one thing in Don Quixote, which was to do the equal of a Sherry Levine painting. I just wanted to see if I could do a Sherry Levine, and I did it on Don Quixote. And now I'm in England, I don't know, to me it's a little pretentious. The new work's science fiction, Empire of the Senseless. And it's got no theory behind it. Like all my books had such theory behind them. And this one's just kind of like I'm having fun and it's an adventure story. And I'm having a lot more fun with it than I've had in a long time. I guess it's like bodybuilding a little that way. I'm just doing it. And it's the senseless. And it's very much about taboo. Deeply about taboo. And I don't know, maybe there'll be trouble with
What
it.
taboos do you think still
Oh, absolutely.
register? What are
Well, I've been thinking about it. I've been reading everything I can on it. Because it's fascinating, isn't it? Because the incest, the father-daughter incest business, for instance, seems to go back to the Fisher King and to be really political, so that what we've taken to be a personal matter seems to be more a political matter about the unity of the tribe or the unity of the people. And it seems to be about eating, for one thing, that you don't eat your relatives, much less your king. You know, eating seems to, it's all about the body. It gets back to the political body. As far as I can tell, and and you just blow. You know, every time I touch, I can feel in the writing when I touch a taboo, and all I'm trying to do is write through taboos.
Sure, but it also, if you like, breaks a taboo within a political establishment, which is so concerned at the present moment, for example, to reveal how extensive child abuse and incest.
Well, I have a huge chapter called Child Sex. And that's where I think there are going to be huge problems.
So you're breaking taboos not only within the...
Oh, yeah, because when I write, I don't write about things, I do them. I mean, that's visceral. I mean, to write about something is academic, and to do it in your writing is visceral.
Sure, sure. And finally, what about music? I've continually, when I'm reading your writing, I think there should be a soundtrack.
No, I'm probably hearing something.
You should take it slowly.
Well, you know, I've made money for so many years by doing readings, so I have to sort of get away with it. You know, so I guess, you know, everything's written to be read aloud.
Do you listen to lots of music when you're writing?
Oh, I listen to music all the time. I have fights with my neighbors continuously. I've sort of worked it out that I don't play it after 6 and I can play it before.
Who do you listen to?
Now? So the last 4 days I've been listening to the continuously. The.
Yes.
Yeah, I haven't stopped. It's just getting, oh God.
And do you work well?
A lot of jazz I listen to, you know, punk and jazz.
And I mean, do you find yourself motivated to go and look at films or to go and look at dance? And one, again, I mean, this is a
films
slightly
and music, probably.
I mean, I saw perhaps, maybe in a slightly more distant way, a similar concern with doing new things with the body in Pina Bausch in the...
Oh yeah, I love Pina Bausch's
work.
In
the Chantal Ackerman film about Pina Bausch, which was on last week. And she seems again to be, in a very different way, but nonetheless just insisting on a different kind of look at the body.
Yeah.
And very...
No, I like the visceral dance very much. I like dance that you sort of post-Judson Church.
So you do find it necessary to go out and...
Oh yeah, I was trained as a dancer too. I worked with, oh God, I can't remember who I worked with. What was her name? Tina Brown, is it? I took a class with her, and with Simone. I remember taking Simone classes with Simone Forti, and with a number of dancers. That interesting in this context.
So film and music and dance are perhaps important influences rather than great literary figures, or...
Well, great literary figures are, but not here. It would be people like Herman Melville, who's a very important influence, or Gertrude Stein, or people like that are very important to me.
And finishing up, perhaps you might just like to say another few words about science fiction and about what the writing that you're engaged in at this moment.
Well, I was never interested in science fiction until I came to this country. But I think here, because there is no underground movement, a lot of this sort of non-Uxbridge writing goes into science fiction. And really the main work in the last 10 years has been done through science fiction here. It's really the most interesting area. I mean, even Doris Lessing or, J.G. Ballard. It's the one place that you're allowed to do everything you can't do in what almost looks like the social realist novel.
And also breaks down the barriers between pop culture and garbage.
Right. I mean, Forbidden Planet is another land.
Exactly. So do you think that, do you find yourself in sympathy with some ideas about postmodernism?
I didn't even know what postmodernism was. Now I think I do. But, I mean, I'm still not sure, right? I mean, obviously, if I'm interested in copying, I'm interested in that aspect of postmodernism. Right. Which I'm very much. I mean,
and surface, when you...
Yes, very much in surfaces.
Yes.
Some area of postmodernism, not other areas, because, I mean, I was very influenced by Silver. More towards the political side of postmodernism, which never really came as heavily into the Anglo-Saxon culture. More in what it would be to have a non-hierarchical political structure if an autonomy is possible, you know, what sexual relations would look like in a non-hierarchical structure. You know, things like that. Decentralization is absolutely major to me, but I don't think decentralization is taken as the major focus of postmodernism in the Anglo-Saxon culture for obvious reasons.
One final question. Mothers come out really rather badly in your writing. I haven't yet come across a mother who is of any significance. Is this something you've thought about?
Oh, it's probably true in my life. Oh. I hate to think I write autobiographically and it probably comes roaring out. My mother was, I adored her, but she was quite mad and we didn't have good relations. I was disowned, to put it mildly.
I mention that because mothers and daughters are such a common topic for reconsidering and angsting on and whatever. And
I'm very close to my grandmother. I think grandmothers must come out okay. She does in my new book. My grandma comes out great. I made her into a Russian anarchist. Mothers don't come, you know. You can't get away from, I guess you can't get away from childhood totally. Hello, I'm Erica Jong. I'm a real novelist. I write books that talk to you about the agony of American life, how we all suffer, the growing pain that more and more of us are going to feel. Life in this country is going to get more horrible, unbearable, making us maniacs, because mania and death will be the only doors out of prison, except for those few rich people. And even they are agonized prisoners in their masks. The paths, the ways they have to act to remain who they are. You think booze, sex, coke, rich food, etc. are doors out? Temporary oblivion at best. We need total oblivion. Huh? What was I saying? Oh yeah. My name's Erica Jong. I'd rather be a baby than have sex. I'd rather go goo-goo, goo-goo. I'd rather write goo-goo. I'd rather write, fuck you. I'm not catering to you anymore. I'm getting out. I'm getting out. I'm ripping up my clothes. I'm ripping up my skin. I hurt. Pain. Hurt me. Pain at this point is good. Do you understand? Pain at this point is good. Me, Erica Jong. Woo, woo. I'm Erica Jong. I'm Erica Jong. Fuck me, you creep who's going to Australia. You're leaving me all alone. You're leaving me without sex. I've gotten hooked on sex, and now My name is Erica Jong. If there is God, God is disjunction and madness.